Hello and welcome back to the KCC channel. I'm Rob and I hope you are having a wonderful day today. Today I have an epic story with 2 updates about overbearing parents. Let's jump right in. This story comes to us from Throwaway Baby Name. Am I the butthole for breaking my fiance's family tradition by naming my son what I wanted? Throwaway because I have in-laws on Reddit. Myself, 25 female, and my fiance, 27 male, have a 2-month-old son. We are overjoyed at being parents, but most of my in-laws are refusing to even see our baby because of a decision we made concerning his name. My in-laws have a tradition of giving the firstborn son of every generation the same name. Let's say it's Peter. This has been going on for about 7 generations already, and they're very serious about it. My fiance's eldest cousin was the latest person to get named Peter. Every one of his cousins has only had daughters so far, so our baby is the first son of his generation, and consequently should get the name. I have no problem with the name Peter, and would have been okay with naming my son that. Unfortunately, that was also the name of my uncle, who died before I was born. I won't get into the details, but it was tragic and traumatizing for my family. My father never got over losing his younger brother. My grandmother asked the family not to name any of our future children Peter during her lifetime. My mother-in-law and father-in-law knew about this promise and at first seemed to not only be okay with us avoiding the name Peter, but also supportive of the one we chose. However, my grandmother sadly passed away when I was 7 months pregnant. We traveled for her funeral. On our last days there, my in-laws called to offer me their condolences. Then, my mother-in-law asked me if I was willing to think about the name Peter now. Suddenly, they were insistent that the name we chose was awful, and we had to honor their tradition. According to them, they had only agreed to make an exception for us for my grandmother's sake, and had no obligation to keep it now that she had passed. My family agrees that while it's true we don't have to avoid the name anymore, it still doesn't feel right to use it. My fiance agrees with me as well, but his parents spent the last weeks of my pregnancy trying to convince us to change our minds about the name. When our baby was born and we named him what we wanted, my in-laws were furious that we had broken a 7-generation-old family tradition. Some of them hadn't previously wanted to name their sons Peter, but did it anyway for the family's sake. They said our decision was selfish, and that my family should have moved on by now. This has truly nothing to do with whether my family has moved on or not. It just felt like a betrayal to my grandmother and uncle's memories to even consider using the name. My father-in-law offered us $1,000 to change our son's name to Peter after he was born. That was 2 months ago, and neither of my fiance's parents have met the baby or seen us since I was pregnant. Most of my in-laws are on their side, and this is causing a huge rift between my fiance and his family. He assures me he's fine, but I'm starting to feel really guilty about this. Am I the butthole? OP added an edit down below. It says, edit, the tradition started, as far as I know, when OG Peter died and his son, also named Peter, named his firstborn after his father. Peter III ended up having the first son of the following generation and did the same thing. That one died before having children, so his sister gave the name to her son and so on. The name Peter is very common in my country, so none of them ever got bullied over it, and the fact that it was also my uncle's name isn't as unlikely as one might think. Also, middle names aren't used in my country. Most people get the maternal surname before the paternal one instead. Edit number 2 says, it wasn't $1,000, different country, different currency. It's still a lot of money, but would probably translate to about $200 US. Now, OP mentions in their third edit that they posted an update, so let's go jump into the first update right now. This update is titled, Update, Am I the Butthole for Breaking My Fiance's Family Tradition by Naming My Son What I Wanted? I posted this on Am I the Butthole, but it got removed about an hour ago because I mentioned a violent encounter on an edit. I tried editing it out and getting it back up, but it didn't work, I'm posting here in case anyone still wants to read it. Thank you so much to everyone who commented and offered support. A lot has happened since I posted, so I thought I'd give you an update. About a week after my post, my fiance's parents contacted us. They apologized for their behavior and begged to meet my son. They said they were ready to leave the naming debacle behind and truly wanted to be involved in their grandson's life. We were skeptical, but invited them over to meet the baby. The visit went well. They began coming over almost every day during the next 3 weeks. I noticed neither of them ever called my son by his name, but I didn't point it out. For the first time in months, things seemed good between my fiance and his parents. One day, my fiance was helping my father-in-law with something at our place, so my mother-in-law and I went to the park with my baby. Sometime later, I had to go to the bathroom, so I left him in the stroller with her. When I got back, she was sitting on a park bench chatting with a woman who was cooing over my son. I went over there and introduced myself as son's name's mom, and she said, "I thought his name was Peter." I didn't say a word, and neither did my mother-in-law. She followed me to the car and we went back to my apartment. On the way there, I texted my fiance about what had happened. The moment we got there, he kicked both his parents out of our place. He read my text and confronted his father. Thankfully, my father-in-law is a terrible liar and confessed immediately. Apparently, both my in-laws only call my son Peter. That includes whenever they're talking about him, every time they introduce him to someone else, and even baby talking to him on the few occasions they were left alone with him. Neither of them are embarrassed by this, and they both think they're in the right. We're heartbroken, especially my fiance, not only because his parents can't let go of their pride, but also because the name we chose for our son means a lot to us both. I blame myself for encouraging my fiance to allow them near our son. I was raised in a different city than all my grandparents and always wished they could have been more involved in my life. Losing my grandmother didn't help. Pretty much every doubt I had only existed because I thought it would be important for my son to grow up with all his grandparents around. But now, all my guilt is gone. If they can't respect my son enough to call him by his name, they don't deserve to be in his life. I hope they enjoyed the 3 weeks they had with their grandson, because that's all they're getting until they get their heads out of their butts. OP added an edit on the bottom of this one as well. It says, "Edit, I thought I'd clarify some things. First of all, I'm not comfortable sharing my son's name here, but I promise it's not a unique name or anything like that. It's perfectly normal and popular-ish in our country. Secondly, I mentioned this in the comments, but while my family didn't try to dictate me on my son's name, they would never be comfortable with it. My Uncle Peter passed almost 3 decades ago, but it forever changed everyone who knew him. My grandmother's wish might seem a bit irrational, but it was motivated entirely by grief, and it didn't seem right to disrespect that just because she's not around anymore. And to whoever PM'd me that my fiance's only on my side to keep the peace, he didn't want to use the name either. Months before I got pregnant, he told me he hoped one of his cousins would have a son before we did, because he always hated the tradition and sympathized with my family. He's just as angry at his parents as I am, if not more. Also, most of his cousins and some other relatives have come around and apologized." Jumping into the comment section on this one, we have one from a user called Mary E. Friendly. It says, "His parents are unhinged. This reminds me of the story that went around a while back where the in-laws tried to have their grandchild's name legally changed behind the parents' back. You have a perfectly valid reason for not using that name, and I bet much of the rest of the family is sighing in relief that this dumb tradition has been broken." OP showed more restraint than I would have, because if my mother-in-law was telling somebody else that my son's name was not the name that I gave my son, I would have let her have it right there in front of that other person, just so that other person would know just how much of a bad apple my mother-in-law is. OP added one more update on this one. It's titled, "My in-laws started harassing me for destroying their family naming tradition. Update. Hey guys, I posted over on Am I the Butthole a couple months ago about refusing to take part in my in-laws family tradition while naming my newborn son. I wrote an update afterwards, but it got removed because I mentioned a violent encounter in an edit I made, so I reposted it on my page. I'll link to both of those posts. My son is now 5 months old, almost 6. We're still no contact with my fiance's parents, who haven't seen us since May. We've both blocked them everywhere. His relatives who were on our side still are, and most of the ones who weren't haven't come around. If anything, they're even more pissed now. I remember someone suggesting that my fiance's family might stop using the name after we decided not to. Well, you were right. Last week, one of my fiance's cousins announced she was pregnant with a boy. She included her baby's name in the announcement, and it's not Peter. What followed was a string of aggressive Instagram DMs from both mother-in-law and father-in-law. They both created accounts for the sole purpose of contacting me. I didn't see them until 2 days later. They sent me almost an hour worth of voice messages about how I'd ruined their family. They wished their son had never met me, that he'd see me for who I am, and that I'd never gotten pregnant. Many of the messages ended with, "I hope you're happy now," as if they thought they were getting the last word, only to think of something else they wanted to say. There was name-calling, an accusation of me cheating, and the persistent refusal to refer to my son as their grandchild. My fiance and I listened to the messages together. He hadn't gotten any. As much as I tried to distance myself, I was in tears by the time it was all done. I still don't regret anything, especially after the stunt they pulled back in May, but I'm not completely free of the guilt yet. Not to mention their complete disregard for their grandson. I was already having an overwhelming week, and this just seemed like the final straw. I must have spent close to an hour sobbing in my fiance's arms. Once I was calmer, he unblocked his parents just to scream at them for a while. I only heard his side of the conversation, but it was more than enough. He finished the call by saying he didn't want to hear from them again. We had a long talk afterwards. My fiance opened up about the emotional blackmail by his family before and after my pregnancy. My in-laws were close to threatening him with anything they could if we didn't name our son Peter. I told him about my guilt and how awful I feel for putting him through this. We reassured each other, cried a bit more, and had a mostly pleasant evening with our baby. We contacted his cousin. The family is giving her crap for breaking the tradition again. They're being way less aggressive though, and I think many of my in-laws are finally learning to let it go. We're not expecting any apologies anytime soon, but we'll be glad if they come. Our wedding will be in September 2024, and whoever doesn't give us a sincere apology until then is uninvited. My fiance's parents are banned either way. We came to that decision together. Also, I'd like to address some comments on my previous update about how I was letting my family's trauma win, or how the name wouldn't be hurtful now that my grandmother has passed. I can't stress enough the damage my uncle's death caused. He was only 30 years old. He had a fiance, a great career, and his whole life ahead of him. I don't know many details about what happened because I didn't want to upset my family by asking. My grandmother wasn't the only person hurt by this. My entire paternal family was. And if I remember correctly, the person responsible isn't even in jail anymore. It was more than 20 years ago, but the wound never truly closed. So yeah, I think it's safe to say the tradition is over. The next Not Peter will be here in January, right before my son's first birthday. It was never my intention for this to turn into such a crap storm, but I'm so incredibly proud of my little family. Thank you so much to everyone who shared their stories and offered advice during these last few months. I'll be forever grateful for all the support I got from y'all. Jumping down to the comment section on this one, there's one from a user called Ducal14. It says, "Wow, that's all there really is to say here. Good on you for going no contact with your fiance's family. This is a completely ridiculous request, and their behavior doesn't warrant them the right to be in your lives. The naming decision is between you and your fiance, no one else. My guess is that if it wasn't this first name thing, there would be another hill your in-laws would choose to die on. Also interesting, they expect you to just get over the name, but they can't let it go on their end. Seems a bit hypocritical. Enjoy your wedding and only invite the people who you want to be there. Congrats on 6 months of being a parent. I feel like OP and the cousin can now lean on each other for support because they both made the decision to not use that name and to completely break the family tradition. Sometimes no contact is the way to go, especially with an overbearing parent that just isn't going to listen to your wishes.